Implant retrieval is one of the easiest things you can do in your practice, especially if the implant is designed for retrieval. What does that look like? Well, you've heard me speak a lot on the channel about implant design matters. And one thing that we don't talk a lot about is the macrogeometry of the implant. The macrogeometry is whether or not the implant has parallel walls or tapered walls or progressively tapered walls, something like that. So let's take those three and talk about them for a second. When you have an implant that is integrated and it needs to be retrieved for whatever reason, it has to come out. If it's a tapered implant, it is one of the easiest things to retrieve ever. In those cases, all you have to do is place a driver on the implant and reverse torque it. What happens is that the osseointegration is going to be, which is the bone to implant contact area, is going to be placed into a shear load. And placing bone into shear is extremely weak. Bone does not like shear. And so creating a shear load between your implant and the bone will immediately disengage it from the bone. And the fact that it's a tapered implant, the V shape itself, as soon as you break the interface, there is no compression on the radial, there's no radial compression on the bone. The implant will just back out with finger torque. So break the initial osseointegration, it'll just back right out. It's the easiest thing in the world. Now, an implant that is parallel is almost the same way. In fact, all implants come out. The first way you should ever try to take out an implant is just to reverse torque it. The same way you put it in is the same way you take it out. It's not that hard to think about. If that's how you put it in, that's a real good way to take it out. Trying to luxate an implant with threads is not a good way to take an implant out. It will take a big chunk of bone with it. Okay, it'll take a plate, like a labial plate, with it. So what you want to do is you just want to reverse torque it. So put your driver in there. I typically use a driver that has already seen its day. So a lot of times you can plastically deform, which means permanently bend these drivers. And so I would use a driver or an abutment that I don't care about. So I would put that in there so I can get my reverse torque on it and reverse torque it. If this implant is osseointegrated really, really well, and it has flutes, and the flutes themselves have actually gotten bone to grow around them, then what you can do, and my favorite tool is to use a piezo. Use a piezo and just drop down alongside the implant, between the implant and the bone in a couple of locations, and just kind of wiggle it down so you create a little air gap, and then reverse torque it, break it free, and it backs right out. Now, with a parallel walled, it's the same thing. As soon as you break that contact, it comes right out. And then it just basically spins right out of the hole. With a progressively tapered implant, which is one of my favorites to use, it's tapered on the apical aspect, and then the coronal aspect, it remains rather parallel. Once you break this free from the bone, the implant will initially break free on the apical region because of the conical nature. It'll pull right away. In the parallel region, it'll just unthread. So for all three cases, retrieving an implant is extremely easy to back out. Now, let's talk about when we're placing an implant with these thread designs, what can happen. So if you're placing a tapered only implant, so that from the bottom to the top, the implant looks like a V, okay? When that engages bone at the apex, if you've overdriven that implant and you back off on it about a half a turn, you lose almost all torque. You lose almost all torque because what has happened is you've compressed the bone with the V shape of the implant. The macrogeometry will have compressed the bone out. So when you back that out just a little bit, you lose almost all compression. So implant designs like that, they really limit you in the flexibility that you have with your vertical dimension. So if you're a freehand doctor and you place an implant, you go, it's not in the right position and I need to back it up a hair because it's a little too deep, you're going to lose your stability. And what does that mean? Well, you're probably going to have experienced that with that implant, so you're probably not going to back it out, which means you're just going to leave the implant at the depth you're at, which means that you might be leaving your implant in a position that is less than optimal. And that's not what we want to do. Okay, so number one, use a guide so you get your depth right. And number two, use an implant system that gives you the ability to back it out. So with a parallel walled implant and a progressive walled implant, there's a region where the walls are parallel. And those walls that are parallel, you can back that out throughout the entire length of the parallel region and still have stability. You still won't lose all your torque because it'll be in those regions. It's only in the tapered area that you'd lose it. So that's why I like a progressive tapered implant, because it gives me the compressive nature of the tapered portion, but it has the parallel portion near the crestal region, which allows me to maintain torque and give me fine adjustments up and down a couple hundred microns plus or minus as needed to, in order to get my timing right for multi-units for, say, a full-on all-on-X kind of case. This has been another episode of Implants Made Simple. I'm Dr. Robert Stanley, the Smile Engineer, helping you re-engineer your practice every day.